Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hello, welcome to Foreign Policy Review, brought to you by Parrot TV. I'm Dustin Pickering, your host, and we have Carlo Parcelli and Billy Bob as co-hosts today. Today we have Luciana Bohne. I'll let Billy Bob talk a little bit in an introduction to the program about who she is, and I'll let her introduce herself in just a moment here. And we'll be having a wonderful discussion on class conflict, China, and the internal dynamics in the United States of the class conflict. So thanks for joining us today, Luciana, and Billy Bob and Carlo. Thanks for being on the program. So I hope you guys are having a great day today. What's our initial question? So we can get started here and kind of kick it off.
Yeah. First, I'd like to just say that Luciana is calling in by phone, so we're going to struggle through the technical aspects of it. I hope everything goes well. We're very happy that Luciana has agreed to come on and talk to us about kind of specifically. We were going to discuss how the class struggle manifests itself on the national level, and how there's kind of a class struggle amongst the different classes of nations. So the advanced, more rich nations kind of prey upon the those nations that are still developing. And so kind of what plays out on a human level, on an individual level within nations, also plays out on the national stage, with the more advanced countries preying on the developing countries. But I think Luciana can provide some great insight and an expert analysis on that dynamic, and that's what I was hoping to hear from her today. But again, we got some technical difficulties. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. Carlo, did you want to have anything to share?
No, I'd like to just get Luciana
okay
talking.
Excellent. Let's see what's any questions to start us off?
Well, if Luciana would like to tell us a little bit about herself, she has a great, interesting background that is going to be, her story is very interesting. So I'd like to just hear a little bit about her before she gets into the actual issues, if possible.
Okay. So Luciana, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show. And what can I tell you about myself? I'm a retired college teacher, and my life straddled began with World War II. I was born in 1940, let's say, even though it was December 12th. But so it's 60 plus 22. So I'm a good age to look back on and examine the present in. I don't know what else is relevant to the audience. Except that most of my life has been lived in the United States. I was born in Italy, educated the first 20 years in Italy, and then came to the United States and stayed. And that's about it.
Excellent.
And you also edited a film review, right? I think it's important to mention that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You said you also edited a film review.
Oh, yes. Well, I went to school at New York University, and at the time that I went in the 60s, the beginning of the 60s, there were no film schools in the United States. But New York University had just a few courses, the history of cinema, some aesthetics, it, of course, grew over the last, I have 50, I don't know what years, into a film school. But when I was an undergraduate there, I was very interested in film because it was a time when film was very political and very, very international in New York City. You could actually see there was such a thing as art houses, and they showed films from all over the world, India, Japan, Africa, and I was interested. And we had a teacher who, one teacher in film. Eventually, Martin Scorsese became a sort of graduate assistant on the sideline. But the reason why I mentioned film is because most of my political awareness, though I was critical of the United States foreign policy, even at age 20, film had a definitive formation on my direction, on my political direction, because, for example, films such as The Battle of Algiers crystallized the struggle of the Third World for independence from, in that case, it was France. So it was a very important film to show an alternative, a struggle elsewhere. I was interested in Indochina war that had just ended in 1954 in Indochina and had beat France out of Vietnam, and then America took over. But just to focus, the films from, by Indian directors, by Japanese directors, by African directors, films on colonialism made me very interested in third world politics. This was an exciting time. This is the time when in the 50s, and I would have been 14, 15. In 1955, the Bandung conference took place in Indonesia, which gathered people from Asia, nations recently independent from Asia and Africa, and to which China participated. So my environment, and then of course, the Vietnam War, the American war in Vietnam started. And we were, at least I was, a generation of not only post-World War II people, young people who were shocked by war and opposed to war, especially nuclear. But we also were surrounded by images and reality of third world uprising and of America's role in suppressing most of them. For example, I was aware at age 21 of the struggle in the Congo. The assassination of Lumumba was very influential. And all this was, shall we say, aided by the fact that my interest in literature was outside just the strict British English literature, but that I was becoming interested in what was being written in Africa over the 60s and late 60s. In the post-independence period. So I would say that because I came from elsewhere to the United States, and I had a comparative, even though, a small comparative spectrum, my interest was always broader, let's say, than the average American. But even so, at the time, even in America, there was, because of the Vietnam War, there was more of a internationalist, by necessity view. So I've talked more about my intellectual background or genesis, and this is why I'm now so interested in what's going on with China and Russia and Iran and Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like me to go on?
Yeah, just give us, like, what is your take on this conflict with Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan?
Yeah.
And
well, before I do that, perhaps I should clarify what you people have actually been interested in asking me, and that is how I see or why or how I see this conflict between the United States and China right now, reduced to that. And reduced to this, conflict. Or rather, I should say that I want to clarify what class struggles are. If we read Marx, of course, the struggle of his day was the capitalist and the proletarian class. They both Engels and Marx were aware of the colonial situation. Marx was very scathing about the way the Europe conducted itself in the colonies. I can't remember the quotation, but he said that at home the bourgeois conduct itself with apparent civility, but that in the colonies that civility goes naked, meaning that it was just savage and brutal and without any kind of pretense at civility or civilization. So they were aware of the colonial question, but their struggle, their day, was to gather together the forces that could oppose and overthrow the exploitation inherent in the capitalist system, which was, the owners of the means of production versus labor. And that was the paradigm of the class struggle as far as Europe was concerned under the noses. Even though imperialism, at least in Britain, had become official by 1859. Britain was declared officially an empire, and whereas before the colonies had been handled by private companies such as the East India Company, etc. So imperialism was off and official. But the struggle in Europe, the struggle to organize what became the Socialist Party, which they called the Social Democrat, was this paradigm, labor and capitalism and the capitalist. It took Lenin to expand that paradigm. Some would say that Lenin, in a minute, some would say that there is, and has been said, that there is a difference between Western Marxism and Eastern Marxism. that Eastern Marxism really is summarized in Lenin's thesis on imperialism. Let me see if I can simplify this. So, whereas the paradigm in Europe was labor, capitalist and labor, when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917, they realized that the Tsar's empire was constituted by all these nations, national people, I should say, what we call ethnic. They were called national people in Central and Eastern Asia, who had absolutely no political power, independence, sovereignty, right to own language, So this was the Tsar's prison house of these national people. And I think it was the second decree. The first decree of the Bolsheviks in 1970, I think, was to end the war. And the second decree was to allow, to offer to the, let's call it, the colonies within the Tsar's empire. It was to offer them equality. It was to offer them to join Russia. It wasn't the Soviet Union until 1922. To offer Russia, to offer the colonies to join Russia in the Bolshevik government, or to break away at any time and declare independence, something that came to bite in 1992 when they started breaking away. However, Lenin felt that this was absolutely necessary, that equality of people, of nations, even within what became the Soviet Federation, if you want to call it that, that had to be equality among nations, and that the crucial part was that it should be that these nations should be able to be independent at any time, otherwise they weren't, or something like that. So in other words, first of all, the paradigm extended from inequality of class, from class inequality between labor and capital, moved on to a kind of implied that there would be a class struggle if two nations dealing with each other were unequal in power, unable to defend themselves. One was stronger and imposed the will on the other, which, of course, is what imperialism feeds on. It feeds on this inequality of nations. So when the liberal, when Wilson wrote his 14-point self-determination, all that, in World War I, the reality was it was all on paper. In the reality, the world was divided between a core of powerful nations and a periphery of vulnerable. And this is a class situation. So this is why I say that today there is a class struggle on a national level between the core imperialist nations, that would be the U.S., because that's the one empire that been existing since 1945, and its vassals and allies and wannabe and hangers-on and cocktailers. So there is that core versus right now China. There's more that I wanted to say about Lenin. Let's see. About the effect that 1914 had on him. That is, when the Social Democrats, the party that Marx and Engels founded, socialists, etc., joined the imperialist core, they were in parliament and they voted credit to their countries to go and fight in World War I for their country. And this, because it was an inter-imperialist war, was really a war on that butchered the working class of all countries. And as a result of that war, he wrote his essay on imperialism, which is something that in the West is simply ignored. Lenin and imperialism, they don't want to hear about it. Our Marxists, our people on the left. This is why Vietnam, Laos, Cuba, China, and DPRK, North Korea, call themselves Marxist-Leninists because they have not only the Marxist element, the revolutionary element of the working class, the workers overthrowing, overthrowing the capitalist system and inserting a workers' dictatorship. But also, these are countries that know that imperialism is active and strong. Strong, in terms of, it's not strong really, but it's devastating and it's murderous.
Yes.
So the Leninist implies that acknowledges that another struggle to wage is the struggle against the strong and oppressive nation.
Yes, Lenin's contribution to Marxism-Leninism is primarily the imperialist dimension. And when you mention World War I, there's a very vivid story involving Vietnam, because at that time, Vietnam had been promised its independence by Wilson and the American government, and Ho Chi Minh traveled to the Versailles, I think that's where it was, and there's that wonderful story, not wonderful really, but horrifying story, where he went to argue the case for acknowledging the promise of Vietnamese independence, and was literally hurled down the steps in front of the palace where Wilson was holding court, and by U.S. Marines, and that was a game changer for Ho Chi Minh to experience that, and
that's right.
So could you tell us a little bit about your take on China right now? What's occurred in the last couple of weeks, several weeks?
We're talking about the present crisis. Well, I don't know if you want to call it crisis. About China, the visit. Can you specify a bit?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a brief summary of my take on Pelosi's visit, and I see it as a great PR stunt pulled off by Pelosi. I mean, obviously, the way a lot of people in the United States are seeing it, here's this frail 82-year-old woman who's drunk all the time and whose dentures come loose while she's talking, and she ignited this firestorm of concern around China, so that they sent this huge contingent of force to really surround Taiwan. And I all I was hearing from everyone I could read was, well, this was Pelosi's visit was crazy and had no meaning, but it not only does it have that specific PR meaning among the American public, including Breitbart people on the far right, but also it's a very practical dimension, because it finally took a CNN, believe it or not, talking head to point out that this will reverse a $70 billion reduction, and this will help reverse a $70 billion reduction in military spending and another huge reduction in the spending on nuclear weapons research, because of China's show of power and the U.S. media playing that up, CNN playing that up, for example, CNBC, even Fox News, frankly, playing that up. China has made themselves out to be this horrifying bugaboo that the United States can just not ignore, because if they're going to rally their forces over this one lady who's not going there and accomplishing anything, what would they do if there was a real threat? And I think that was and it also has to do with the 2022 congressional elections, because I think there's going to be a little bit of boost for the deep state and the Democratic Party and that sort of thing. But that's my take on it. And would you like to? You can refute it or enhance it or whatever. What's your take?
Yeah, you gave the point from the point of view you interpreted the domestic take. From how it's supposed to be seen and projected, and it's bipartisan, because as we know, Rubio and Pompeo egged her on, right? They were on her side. And this points out one thing, that U.S. Foreign policy on dominating the world, on dominance, on hegemony, is consistent, is bipartisan, and has been in place since 1945. Right now, it all feels feverish and crazy, because it is, in a way, intensifying the attack or the desperation or whatever to be number one, because China is up there breathing down. It's going to be the number one power in the world. There's no question about it. The United States, no empire can stay an empire long without economic supremacy by military force alone. That it can't. I mean, how is China fighting the United States? Not militarily, although it is bringing its defense capacity up to snuff. It is fighting economically. It has built the Belt and Road Initiative, which is, in my view, one of the greatest human development projects in history. It aims at basically developing the undeveloped, the third world or the developing world, but really to engage with countries on a level of mutuality in a win-win situation, which of course the United States calls it a debt trap, which is actually what the West has done for 200 years, at least 150. Well, and intensely in the last 70 years. And living off the interest of the debt from what I still call the third world, so forgive me. But so to summarize, Pelosi has pulled off the publicity stunt to boost the chances of the Democratic Party at the next election. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay.
That's part of it, yes.
Fine. Now, that's a very narrow objective.
Yes.
And it's very pathetic, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Oh.
That's exactly very
Well,
pathetic.
the way I see it, from the China point of view, is now what's going to happen with China. People are disappointed that World War III didn't break out, that China didn't show its muscle, didn't start shooting, etc., etc. Well, that's not China's way, because it can do it. You know, it did it in Korea. It can fight. We know that. It chooses not to. It didn't, because it's not convenient, but also because there are two different strategies of competition here. The United States competes militarily, occupies, and sanctions, which is really a kind of siege, military siege in a way. Other than military, it's a siege. It's a military tactic. So the United States is on the militarist footing, while China has nothing to gain from the militaries. From first of all, meeting the United States on the terrain of battle of its own choice. It chooses its own terrain, and that's economic. And an economic choice like the BRIC, like the ASEAN alliances, they're all economic alliances. They're all intended to promote trade, and they're all intended to move the agenda forward on an economic basis that the U.S. apparently can't fight anymore. It has deindustrialized itself, etc. It's weak in that. What it thought it could win with the Iraq invasion, it put its boots on the ground, not just coups, and, it did put boots on the ground twice, in Korea and Vietnam. Both, they were leveled. They were defeated. So then, the CIA ran the show. The Korea, if you go back, all the way back to 1950, and you trace it to today, you'll see that the intrigues were always going on, that now they just feel so much more intense, and perhaps they are maybe because we have communication. But in 1950, the Korean War, in 1953, the Iran coup that reinstalled the Shah in 1954, overturned Guatemala. In 1955, 56, they started undermining Indonesia. Well, yes.
Brazil in 1960.
Cuba sent a decade of coups Brazil, etc., in all of Latin America. Then we have the Uber coup in Chile in 73. All the while the Vietnam War is going on. As soon as the Berlin Wall falls, we bomb Panama. Then we have the Gulf War. Do you see what I mean?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Luciana,
It's continuous. But now to get back to Pelosi and this week, etc.
Luciana, let's pick that. We're going to take a quick break.
Narrow aim, you know.
We're going to take a brief break.
The voting chances. It's narrow. And why do I say that? Because this, from the Chinese point of view, has opened the opportunity to alter the political geography in the Straits and around Taiwan. And what I mean by that is that immediately Beijing sanctioned 100 entities, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, Taiwanese businesses, agricultural, food and agriculture exports from Taiwan were put on hold. The import of sand, which sounds like a ridiculous thing, but Taiwan has imported 95% of the sand that it imports is from China.
Luciana.
Closed off, banned. And what it means is that, of course, sand makes cement, but also chips. Sand makes cement, and the real estate business is dependent on that, since Taiwan just has rocks. So those two things immediately. So what China is doing is not punishing or bothering to bomb a U.S. aircraft carrier or attack the U.S. forces. It's punishing the collaborator regime in Taiwan that is the Democratic Progressive Party. Nothing could be farther from the truth, but that's what this is, just a party in the pocket of the United States, and punishing collaborators, people who invited Pelosi in, politicians who invited Pelosi in, knowing that this is a violation of international law, since the United Nations recognizes China, that there is only one China, and Taiwan is a province of it. That is a United Nations. That's the basis on which China is recognized by the United Nations and by international. So for Taipei to invite this high grade official of the United States to make a visit, well, considering that 3 communiques between China and the United States in the 70s, 78, 79, under Carter, agreed that, among other things, but this is the relevant one, the no official visit from an American official would take place between Taiwan and the United States, that the relations would be cultural, commercial, educational, whatever, but not official. So for somebody who is in line to be, the president of the United States, if the president dies, the vice president becomes president. If something happens to the vice president, well, Nancy would be president. So for her to visit Taiwan is to breach one China policy and the communiques upon which the diplomatic relations between China and the United States were established when they were established under Carter in 1979, 8, before he left.
Yes.
So, okay, back to focus. So, okay, first action was the 100 entities sanctioned agriculture and food and fishing.
Luciana, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yep.
Okay, so I apologize, but we're supposed to take a break halfway through, so we're going to take a quick 30-second break, and I really want to come back to exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted, and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your products and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our news site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
Welcome back to Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering, and again we have Carlo Parcelli and Billy Bob with us today, and our special guest on the phone is Luciana Bohne. We'll talk some more about the Pelosi visit here. Let's let her have some concluding thoughts here for the program as we continue to discuss this issue. So go right ahead and finish up what you were saying earlier.
Thank you. So I was saying that the first action from Beijing in reaction to Pelosi actually landing in Taipei was the 100 sanctions against food and agricultural products regularly imported by the mainland from Taiwan. The second thing is also important, and that is that the People's Liberation Army, Navy, and Air Force, the PLA, announced that they would do live ammunition and long-distance missile exercises in 6 spots around Taiwan Island. What this means is this: Taiwan depends on trade by sea. This is virtually a blockade. It won't last. It has been announced that it will go from Thursday to Sunday, but virtually this is a 3-day blockade.
Luciana, I want to ask you something of a practical nature. My research team, my wife Rosalie, pointed out to me about the sanctions this morning, including the sand and the chips, and this involves American corporations and domestic jobs and also domestic American politics ultimately. So when, say, for example, the chips industry is no longer as viable as it was on Taiwan, where it was central, now there can be that can be moved more to the United States and to the companies that want to produce chips here, which will produce more jobs. Do you think you could see the pattern I'm getting at? Do you think that has any validity, that notion?
That was the move from Taiwan to Arizona, we're talking about, of TSMC.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem there seemed to be that the genius engineers don't want to move to the United States. They prefer, this is the last I knew, they would prefer to work in China. And I haven't followed since then what's the situation with TSMC. That's the little detail I remember, that the creative part of the bunch, and I would have to look it up, but this move may not be as devastating to China, to the, as it's made out to be. And because this was going on 2 or 3 months ago, I don't remember the details, but we also have, since then, something Huawei came up with lately that I don't remember, that was also kind of chip revolutionary. I don't remember that. But I would say, and I'm sorry not to be able to be more specific and more informed on this, but I don't think it's the way that the reality is completely the way that it's presented in the United States, that it's far less dire, that if the TSMC, the idea that TSMC will leave Taiwan and break the chip back, what do you call it, off the back of China, is overplayed. Can I get away with that?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
We can look into it, but I mean, obviously the rush in China is to be able to produce, to become chip independent, from by creating, by inventing all sorts of alternative chip making or chips. So, but contrary to go back, because I didn't finish and I'm obsessive about finishing. So, whereas in the United States, the trip is being played, Pelosi's trip is being played as an accomplishment, as a sticking it to China, whatever. We have to look at what am I saying? We have to look at what's it called? Unintended consequences. There are unintended consequences, and one of the unintended consequences, it is talked about all over the media in China, is speeding up reunification quietly, by playing one card at a time. So by choking, if the PLA continues every once in a while to do this blockade, let's call it, simplify it, this 3-day blockade, if it starts, in quotation mark, violating the median line, the line that's not legal, but that's been observed by both China and Taiwan of not crossing it, if they start crossing it, if the PLA and, little by little, they start going, if all of this hurts the DPP, which it will, and we have a changing government, let's say the Kuomintang gets back, and the people are upset because the economy is being impacted, it might be that they ask for unification, which was almost accomplished, or was in a good way of being accomplished in 2014. There were all kinds of agreement, but the puppet, there she is, the U.S. puppet, this Thai, they managed to get her in, to get her party in, and that was stopped. But so the unintended consequences will be that this reunification will be sped up instead of slowed down. And anything else that I need to add? No, that's the conclusion that that to this trivial gain of, if it is a gain, of publicity, supposedly positive publicity for the Democratic Party, against this you have to weigh the loss, actually, of, I would say, even the control the U.S. now has to navigate across the strait and around, etc. What if that's another reality that can change? The status quo, as they say, of navigation, of treaties, etc., that may change. And that's not in favor of the United States. I mean, it's the same thing as Hong Kong.
Right. Thanks for doing this.
Right? It has consequences.
That was my next question. Go ahead.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Or Billy Bob. One of the two of you. I've said enough.
Go on, Billy. You go, Billy.
So I'm just enjoying listening to your analysis, Luciana.
Yes.
And I wish we had more time. We got about 8 minutes. Do you have anything what else would you like to say on this broad topic, just to inform anybody listening and impart some information that you think is really relevant and necessary? Anything else you can think of that you want to discuss?
Yeah, it might be.
Well, continue with the Hong Kong comment. I would love to hear you.
Hong Kong. Well, we know that the 2020 disruptions in Hong Kong were fueled by foreign interests, namely UK and US, funded by National Endowment of the Humanities, by NED, National Endowment of Democracy, which is just an outsource of the CIA. But anyway, they were the disturbances, the acts of terrorism, the year-long violence, supposedly for democracy in Hong Kong. This violence, Molotov cocktails, arson, beating of the elderly, which, by the way, Nancy Pelosi described as a beautiful sight to see, because it was characterized here as a movement for democracy, when in fact it was a movement for regime change, for Hong Kong to split, another separatist. It was an attack on the one China policy. And just as now it has been this week with the visit of Pelosi, it formally in the State Department, you will read the State Department saying we oppose independence for Taiwan. And we support the one China policy, but their actions belie these words. They betrayed them. So these upheaval in Hong Kong, funded and organized by U.S. and UK forces, intelligence, etc., were intended to challenge the one China policy, but also they're provocative. They were intended to, hopefully, for Beijing to send the PLA in, and they didn't. They didn't in Taiwan, and they didn't in Hong Kong. Because, as I repeat, they choose their territory to fight. Any sensible person would choose their own territory unless they're invaded. And the territory was legal. That is, China took a year to resolve the Hong Kong problem. It consulted the National Assembly in April of whatever, 1920, I think, and passed laws that should have been on the book already against sedition, etc., shut down newspapers and other rags that promoted insurrections that went against the Constitution, etc., and calmed down Hong Kong, got an election, and got rid of Ned left, got rid of all these subversive. Nevertheless, if you check even today on Ned, you will see that $10 million and this and that is still devoted to bringing democracy to Hong Kong. But nevertheless, we can say that the unintended consequences were to bind Hong Kong and integrate it more into the legal system of the mainland, and to stabilize it and to clean it up a bit. And the same thing is going to happen to Taiwan. So that was that. Now, on the question of class war, on the question of where should we stand, we who care about peace, who care about a world where people can trade peacefully, benefit, grow, learn from each other, whatever, all of that stuff, a peaceful world, peaceful coexistence, a mutual benefit, etc. If we care for that, where should we stand? Well, I maintain that the class war is now between the imperialist core, which is the United States and its ally, is the choice. And to exemplify, the 5 socialist countries still existing in the world support Cuba, DPRK, Iran. No, sorry. The 5 existing socialist countries are China, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, and DPRK. So whenever the United States is attacking one of those, we're on their side. There's no dithering liberal, but no, this is the important thing. This is the class war. It's a war on a class of nations that don't want to be subject to U.S. imperialist capitalism, that want their own system, and support the other countries that the United States is going after by sanctioning Russia, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Afghanistan, regardless of who is in power, whether it's Ayatollahs or Taliban's or what. Who would the people of those places be better off? That's the question. With the U.S. or as intermediate or transitional, we could call it, because if Iran gets independence, then it has a chance to develop in some direction if it wants to, in some, more, what to call it, whatever, more, whatever.
What China has done is taken the word exploitation out of international relations between countries, and that is I think the greatest fear that the West has.
That's right.
We have come to the final hour, the full hour of the program. So I want to thank all you guys today for being here, and this discussion has been really great. And hopefully we'll have another one pretty soon. It's really interesting dynamics going on in the world today that are playing out. So this has been the Foreign Policy Review. And subscribe to the channel, New York Parrot, and you'll get some more news updates and so forth. And thanks to Luciana for being with us today. And just remember to take a look at the other sites, the website, NewYorkParrot.com, WorldInkers.com, and America Open Market. Thanks for joining us on the program. Have an excellent afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.